I remember the smell of the pine wreath on the front door. It was fresh and sharp, the kind of smell that used to mean something good to me, family, warmth, the holidays we had celebrated in that house for over 30 years. I remember the way the snow looked on the lawn that evening, untouched and perfectly white under the porch light like something out of a Christmas card. I remember standing at the door of the house I had paid for, the house where I had raised my children, the house where I had buried a marriage and rebuilt a life, and I remember feeling, for just one moment, genuinely hopeful. I should have trusted the knot in my stomach instead. My daughter, Renee, had organized the gathering. She called it a holiday dinner. Nothing formal, she said. Just the family, together, the way we used to be. She had said those words, the way we used to be, and I had let myself believe them. I am 63 years old, and I can tell you that there is a particular kind of foolishness that only a father can practice, the willingness to believe, over and over again, that the people he loves are better than they have shown themselves to be. The table was set when I walked in. There were candles, the tall ivory kind that my late wife Margaret used to buy every December. I noticed them right away. And I don't know if Renee put them there deliberately or if it was just a coincidence, but the sight of them sent a slow ache moving through my chest. Margaret had been gone for 4 years. 4 years, and I still couldn't look at ivory candles without feeling the shape of her absence like a stone behind my ribs. My son-in-law, Craig, was already at the table. He gave me a handshake that was just loose enough to be an insult without being provable as one. He was a broad-shouldered man with a ready smile and cold eyes, the kind of man who had always reminded me of a salesman charming right up until the moment you checked the fine print. My daughter Renee stood near the kitchen doorway, holding a dish towel, watching me the way a person watches, something they have been waiting a long time to see. My younger son, Paul, sat at the far end of the table. He was the one I hadn't expected. He lived in Portland, kept mostly to himself, worked as a contractor. He gave me a small nod when I came in and went back to looking at his hands. My wife, Donna, was not there. Renee had told me in advance that she didn't want Donna at this dinner. She had said it very calmly, very reasonably, the way Renee did most things. She said the family needed time to reconnect without outside influence. I had considered refusing to come. I had stood in my kitchen at home, the phone against my ear, and I had almost said no, but I didn't, because I am a father, and fathers, in my experience, almost always say yes when they should say no. We sat down. We ate. The conversation was careful, the way conversation is when everyone at the table is managing something they haven't said yet. Craig talked about his firm. Quote, Renee talked about the renovations on the house that I was paying for, the house where they had been living for the past 2 years rent-free while they got back on their feet. As Renee had put it, Paul was quiet. He had been quiet my entire life, the kind of quiet I had always mistaken for contentment. I know better now. It was after the main course, when Renee came back from the kitchen carrying a folder instead of dessert, that I understood what kind of evening this actually was. She set the folder down on the table in front of me. She sat down across from me and folded her hands and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as prepared. Craig leaned back in his chair. Paul looked up from the table for the first time all evening. Dad, Renee said, we need to talk about the estate. I looked at the folder. I looked at my daughter. I had known Renee for 38 years. I had held her, as a newborn, in a hospital hallway, while the nurses told me everything was fine. I had taught her to drive in an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning. I had walked her down the aisle, and in that moment, looking at her across the table, I felt something I had never felt toward her before. Something cold and clear and irreversible. I think, I've already spoken to my attorney, I said. The estate is handled. Craig straightened up. That's actually what we wanted to discuss, he said. The changes you made, the ones involving Donna. Those aren't up for discussion, I said. Renee opened the folder. Inside was a document, a copy of my updated will, which meant that someone had accessed information they had no business accessing. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I kept my voice level. I asked her where she got that. That doesn't matter, Craig said. It matters considerably, I said. Renee pushed the folder toward me. You're leaving the majority of everything to a woman you've known for 2 years, she said. while your own children get almost nothing. Do you understand how that looks, Dad? Do you understand what people will say? What they're already saying? That I understand exactly what I'm doing, I said. I'm leaving my estate to the woman who has been by my side for the last 2 years. The woman who was there every single day after your mother died. And turn mother, the woman who cooked for me when I couldn't get off the couch. The woman who drove me to my cardiology appointments and sat in the waiting room for 4 hours without a word of complaint. She's a gold digger, Craig said. Just like that. Flat and certain, the way a man says something he has rehearsed. I set down my fork. The table was very quiet. 3. The ivory candles threw a soft, warm light across the dishes and the glasses and the faces of my children. And I thought about Margaret, and I thought about how much I wished she were here, and then I thought about what my daughter had just allowed her husband to say to me at her own dinner table, in the house I had financed, and the last of my patients left me without ceremony. I came here tonight because I thought you wanted to spend time with me, I said. I see now that I was wrong. Renee's voice cracked slightly. We're worried about you, Dad. Donna has isolated you from this family. She keeps you away from us. She answers your phone. She monitors your email. She's controlling you, and you can't see it because what? I asked. Because I'm old? Because I'm grieving? Because I'm easy to manipulate? And because you're lonely, Craig said, and the way he said it soft and theatrical, like he actually pitied me, was the thing that finally made something snap. It didn't snap loudly. It wasn't a scene. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse. It was the sound of a door closing in a part of myself I hadn't known was still open. 9. You want to talk about isolation, I said. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. Let's talk about the last 18 months of your mother's life. I placed a small recorder on the table. One of those digital ones, no bigger than a thumb drive. Paul's eyes moved to it. Craig's smile faltered. N. Renee went very still. N. I found this 2 weeks ago, I said, in a box in the attic. In a winter coat. Your mother wore the December, before she died. Paul said, quietly, what is it? It's a recording, I said. Your mother made it herself. Renee's face had changed. The prepared expression was gone. Something else was underneath it, something I didn't have a name for yet but that I was beginning to recognize. I pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the dining room. If you find this, she said, then something has happened to me. I need you to know that I am not losing my mind. I need whoever is listening to understand that what they have been telling you about me is not true. Her voice was thin. It trembled at the edges, but it was clear. It was Margaret, completely and unmistakably, speaking from somewhere, just past the point of being afraid. Nanta. Renee has been taking my money, she said. Small amounts at first. From the joint account I share with your father. She has been telling me it is for household expenses. For bills, for repairs. End quote. But I found the statements. I have been keeping them in a folder inside my gardening books because I was afraid she would go through my desk. I found over $40,000 moved in the last year alone. When I confronted her, she told me I was confused. She told me I was misremembering. She called Craig, and Craig came over and they sat with me at this table and they told me very kindly and very gently that my memory had been getting worse for months. That I had been forgetting things. That they were worried about me. A sound, barely audible. Margaret clearing her throat. I am not forgetting things, she said. I am being told that I am forgetting things, and there is a difference. I am 61 years old, and I know the difference between confusion and being lied to. I know what I saw in those statements. I know what I know. I want my husband to know. I want Paul to know. I am leaving this here because I don't know who else to trust. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. The candles flickered. A piece of wood shifted in the fireplace. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. Paul stood up. He pushed his chair back and he stood up, and he looked at his sister, and his face was something I had never seen from him before. Not anger. Exactly. Worse than anger. Something final. How long? He said to Renee. His voice was very low. How long were you doing this? Paul, that recording is not… Craig started. Don't. Paul didn't raise his voice. He just said the word and Craig stopped. Don't talk to me right now. 10. Renee had her hands flat on the table. She was looking down at them. The folder with the copy of my will was still open in front of her, and in that moment it looked like the most damning thing I had ever seen. She had come to this dinner to challenge my choices. She had come prepared with documents and arguments and a husband who called my wife a gold digger. And underneath all of it, beneath the concern and the careful language and the family dinner she had arranged, was $40,000 she had taken from her mother, one quiet transaction at a time. How did she not tell me? I asked. I wasn't asking Renee. I wasn't asking anyone in particular. It was the question that had been sitting in my chest for 2 weeks, since the night I found the recorder and sat alone in the kitchen listening to my dead wife's voice telling me she was scared. How did she sit with me every evening for the last year of her life and not tell me? Paul answered. He sat back down slowly, and he answered. She told me, he said. 6 months before she died, she called me. She said she thought Renee was taking money from the account. Number 6. She said she was going to tell you, but she was afraid you wouldn't believe her. She was afraid of what it would do to the family. She asked me what she should do and I told her. He stopped. He put his hand over his mouth for a moment. I told her to wait. I told her to be sure. I told her to get proof first. The silence in the room was enormous. I thought I was being practical, Paul said. I thought I was helping her build a case. I didn't know she was already. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. And us too. I understood then, not all at once, but in the way that understanding sometimes comes like a tide, slow and total and cold. And Margaret had known. She had been frightened and she had been certain and she had tried to do the right thing, to be sure, to have evidence, and by the time she had it, she was gone. She had put it in a coat pocket in December and worn it through the last winter of her life, carrying it with her, and no one had found it in time to help her. I looked at my daughter. She was still looking at her hands. Her face had collapsed inward in a way I had never seen before, not even when she was a child, not even in the worst moments of her mother's illness. Did you know she found out? I asked her. At the end, did you know she knew? Renee didn't answer. Renee. My voice didn't waver. I was grateful for that. Did you know your mother was aware of what you had done? She looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, and in that expression I saw the last 4 years rearranged into a shape I could finally read. The visits that coincided with my bank statements being out. The conversations that turned gently toward the cost of my care, my future, what a burden it must be to manage all of this alone. The way she had encouraged me to see a doctor after Margaret died, taking notes in a small book she carried in her purse, asking questions about my memory. The very specific, very careful kindness of a person building a file. We were struggling, she said. Her voice was thin. Craig's business had debts. You needed $40,000, I said. You took it from your mother without asking. And when she found out, you told her she was confused. You told her she was losing her mind. Craig put his hand on the table. There's no proof that, There is a recording, Paul said, without looking at him, of my mother's voice describing exactly what happened. That is proof. That is her voice. Alfie, that is her voice. Do not sit at this table and tell me what there is and isn't proof of. Craig stood up. He was collecting his composure, the way a person collects their coat, quickly and without much grace. He said something about lawyers. He said something about context and misinterpretation and grief making people see patterns that weren't there. He put his hand on Renee's shoulder and she shrugged it off, which I think surprised both of them. I picked the recorder up from the table. I held it in both hands for a moment. It weighed almost nothing. I went to my attorney after I found this, I said. I went to him the same night. He advised me that this recording, combined with the bank statements Margaret kept, which were still in the gardening books, which are still on the shelf in the living room, which no one thought to look in, constitutes grounds for a legal case. Renee looked up. I also went to the police, I said. 3 days ago. I filed a report. There is an investigation that has already begun. 1. And the room went very quiet again, but it was a different quality of quiet than before. Before, it had been the quiet of something ending. This was the quiet of something being decided. Craig left first. He didn't say, "Goodbye." He picked up his jacket and walked out through the kitchen, and I heard the back door close with a sound that was almost gentle, as if he were trying even now to avoid drawing attention to himself. I heard his car start in the driveway. I heard it back out and drive away. Renee sat at the table for a long time after he left. The candles burned down another half-inch. Paul got up and stood by the fireplace, his back to the room, his hands in his pockets. I sat with my daughter in the quiet house where she had grown up, and I thought about all the things I had given her and all the things I had missed, and I tried to understand how a child becomes a person capable of looking into their mother's frightened face and saying, "You are confused. You don't remember correctly. You're imagining it." I don't know how that happens. I have spent every night since asking myself if I missed something, some early sign, some small cruelty I dismissed as a bad mood, some moment when I could have redirected what was growing in her. I keep returning to the same answer, which is that I was too focused on providing to pay attention. I wrote the checks and I paid the bills and I co-signed the loans and I called it love, and while I was doing all of that, I missed the texture of my own family. Margaret saw it. Margaret knew. Margaret tried to tell someone and was told to wait, and she waited, and she is gone, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. In the weeks that followed, the process moved slowly and then very fast. Renee retained an attorney. The bank records were subpoenaed. The investigation confirmed what Margaret's recording had described: a pattern of transfers, $43,000 over 14 months, moved from a joint account into a private one held in Craig's name. Craig's firm was also under review for a separate issue involving client funds, which I hadn't known about and which gave the whole picture a texture of systemic dishonesty that made me feel sick in a way I couldn't entirely explain, even to myself. They charged Renee with elder financial abuse. The phrase struck me the first time I heard it. Your mother wasn't elderly, I wanted to say. She was 61. She was a person, but I understood what the law was doing with the category and I didn't argue. Craig was charged separately. He and Renee separated before the trial. Their attorney filed papers claiming Craig had acted without Renee's full knowledge, which was not what the evidence showed. The judge was not moved by this. Paul drove down from Portland and stayed with me for 3 weeks. He slept in his old room. He fixed the gutter on the back of the house that I had been meaning to address since September. He made coffee in the mornings without asking how I took it, because he already knew, because he had always known, because Paul had been paying quiet attention his entire life while I was looking at the wrong people. You were right to wait, I told him one morning. We were sitting in the kitchen. The light was thin and gray outside the window. He shook his head. I should have pushed harder. I told her to wait and He stopped. She was alone with it. She shouldn't have been alone with it. She wasn't alone, I said. She had you. She trusted you enough to tell you. That mattered to her. Paul was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She loved you completely, you know. She wasn't afraid to tell you because she doubted you. She was afraid because she loved this family more than she loved her own safety. She was trying to protect everyone, right up until the end." I had to set my coffee cup down for a moment. I looked out the window at the yard, at the snow still banked along the fence line, at the bare gray branches of the oak tree that Margaret had planted the year Paul was born. I had stood in that yard 1,000 times and taken it for granted. I was not taking it for granted anymore. Donna came to the house the evening after Paul told me that. She didn't make a fuss about it. She just came in and sat with me in the kitchen and let me talk, the way she always had, not filling the silence, not managing my feelings for me, just present in the particular unhurried way that had made me love her in the first place. I told her I was sorry for not having her at the dinner. She said there was nothing to apologize for. I told her I was sorry for the years I had spent letting my children treat her like a problem to be managed. She took my hand across the table and told me that the only thing she wanted was for me to stop apologizing and start sleeping. That made me laugh. The first real laugh I had had in weeks. It didn't sound like much, but it was real. Renee was convicted. The sentencing came 11 months after that December dinner, on a Tuesday in November, cold and overcast. The kind of day that doesn't call attention to itself. I was in the courthouse. I did not want to be there, but I thought Margaret deserved a witness. So I sat in a wooden bench in the back of the room and I watched my daughter stand before a judge and receive a sentence that included restitution, probation, and mandatory counseling, and I tried to feel something clean and clear and resolved. I didn't, entirely. I'm not sure I ever will. She is still my daughter. She is still the person I held in a hospital hallway 38 years ago, the small weight of her in my arms, the most significant thing I had felt in my life up to that point. I cannot undo her. I cannot excise her from my history. I can only decide, going forward, what kind of man I intend to be, what I allow near me and what I refuse, what I call love and what I finally recognize as something else. The week after the sentencing, I drove to the cemetery. It was a gray morning, the light flat and diffuse, the kind of light that makes everything look a little unreal. I stood at Margaret's grave for a long time without saying anything. There was a cardinal on the fence at the far edge of the grounds, and I watched it for a while. Margaret had loved cardinals. And, she always said they were good luck. I told her I was sorry. I told her I should have been paying better attention. I told her that Paul was well, that the oak tree in the backyard was still standing, that Donna had made me laugh for the first time in weeks. I told her that the truth had come out, not cleanly or quickly, but completely. I told her that the recording she had made in those last months, her voice, her fear, her clarity had done exactly what she intended. It had been heard. She had been believed. The praset. I knelt down and put my hand flat on the cold ground above her grave, and I stayed like that for a while, in the gray morning with the cardinal watching from the fence. I have thought, since then, about what it means to truly know the people you live with. I was a provider. I paid for things. I signed things. I fixed things when they broke. And I told myself that this was love, and it was part of it, but it wasn't all of it, and the part I was missing was the careful attention, the willingness to stay still long enough to see what was actually in front of me. Margaret saw it. She saw what our daughter had become, and she knew it, and she recorded her fear in a coat pocket, and she tried to protect everyone, right up until the very end. That is who she was. That is who she will always be to me. My son called me a few weeks before Christmas, from Portland. He asked if I wanted to come up for the holiday. He said Donna was welcome. He said it simply, without ceremony, the way Paul does most things. I told him I'd think about it. Then I called Donna, and she said yes before I finished asking, and I booked the flights that same afternoon. Some things are lost and cannot be recovered. Some doors close and do not open again. But there is still, I have found, something on the other side of ruin, not joy exactly, not the uncomplicated happiness I had before I understood what was happening in my own house, but something quieter and more durable than that. Something that knows its own worth because it has been tested. Something that has looked at the worst of itself and decided, deliberately, to keep going anyway. My daughter's last lesson to me was not the one she intended. She wanted to teach me that I was old and easy to manage, that my grief made me naive, that my love for her was a resource to be drawn down like a checking account. What she taught me instead was this, that I had been looking in the wrong direction for a very long time. And that it was not too late, even at 63, even in the ruins of everything I thought I knew, to finally turn around and look.